The gunshot echoed through the valley, shattering Hannah Dawson's world just as surely as it had shattered her husband's heart. 3 days later, she sat motionless at her kitchen table, tears streaming down her face as she stared at 2 plates of untouched stew, one for her, and one that would never be eaten. Central City, Colorado Territory, 1873, had never felt so empty. The boomtown, once alive with the promise of gold and silver, now seemed hollow to Hannah. The small cabin she'd shared with Thomas for the past 2 years stood on the outskirts of town, far enough away from the saloons and dance halls to offer peace, but close enough to hear the distant piano on quiet nights. Hannah had been sitting there for nearly an hour, the stew growing cold. She couldn't bring herself to eat, not when the other plate sat there, a cruel reminder that Thomas would never come home again. At 23, she was now a widow in a harsh frontier where women alone didn't fare well. The knock at her door was firm but not threatening. Hannah didn't move to answer it. The knocking came again, more insistent this time. "Mrs. Dawson, it's Preston Granger. I've come to check on you." Hannah recognized the voice. Preston Granger, a cowboy who had worked with Thomas at the Silver Dollar Ranch. He'd been there when Thomas was killed, shot by a rustler while defending the ranch's cattle. "Mrs. Dawson, please, I just want to make sure you're all right." She wiped her tears with the back of her hand and rose slowly from her chair. Her legs felt unsteady as she crossed the room and unlatched the door. Preston stood there, his hat in his hands, concern etched across his weather-beaten face. At 28, he was tall and lean, with sandy brown hair that curled slightly at the ends and eyes the color of a summer sky. He'd removed his spurs, she noticed, probably to avoid scratching her wooden floor. "I'm sorry to intrude, madam," he said softly. I wanted to see if there was anything you needed." Hannah shook her head, unable to find her voice. She stepped back, allowing him to enter. It wasn't proper to invite a man into her home, not when she was alone, but propriety seemed to matter little now that Thomas was gone. Preston's gaze fell on the table with its 2 plates of food. Understanding softened his features. He'd seen grief before, too much of it in the West, but something about Hannah's silent pain struck him deeply. "You should eat something," he said gently. Hannah's eyes welled up again. "I can't." Preston set his hat down and moved to the table. "I know it's hard. But Thomas wouldn't want you wasting away like this." "How would you know what he'd want?" The words came out sharper than she'd intended. "Because I knew him, and I was there when—" Preston paused, struggling with the memory. "His last words were about you. He made me promise to look after you." Hannah sank back into her chair, fresh tears flowing. "He shouldn't have asked that of you." "He was my friend," Preston said simply, taking the chair across from her, "and he loved you more than anything in this world." Hannah stared at the plate in front of her, the stew congealing around the edges. Preston reached across the table and pushed the plate closer to her. "Eat," he said. "He'd want you to." Hannah picked up her spoon with a trembling hand. The simple act of caring for herself seemed impossible, but the quiet authority in Preston's voice gave her something to follow, a direction when she felt utterly lost. She took a small bite, then another. The food was bland in her mouth, but she continued, if only to honor Thomas's wishes as conveyed through Preston. "Thank you," she whispered after a few moments, "for being there with him, at the end." Preston nodded, his eyes shadowed with the memory. He didn't suffer long. "That's something, at least." They sat in silence as Hannah ate a little more. Preston didn't touch the other plate, understanding its significance. "The ranch owner, Mr. Sullivan, asked me to tell you that he's paying Thomas's wages through the month. It's not much, but it might help until you decide what to do next." Hannah set down her spoon, having eaten barely a quarter of her meal. "I don't know what to do next. Thomas and we came out here to build something together. I don't know how to do it alone. You have friends here, Mrs. Dawson." "You're not alone. Please," she said softly, "call me Hannah." Preston nodded. "Hannah, do you have family back east you could go to?" She shook her head. "My parents died of fever when I was 16. Thomas was all I had." Preston's expression grew troubled. Central City was no place for a young widow with no family. The mining town attracted all sorts, many of them unsuitable company for a woman like Hannah. "I could help you sell this place if you decide to leave," he offered. "Or I could help you fix it up if you want to stay. That roof looks like it could use some work before winter comes." Hannah glanced up at the ceiling where a water stain had been spreading for months. Thomas had always meant to fix it, but there was never enough time. "Why would you do that?" "Because I promised Thomas. And because it's the right thing to do." Hannah studied Preston's face. There was no guile there, no hidden motive she could discern, just genuine concern and perhaps a touch of the same grief she felt. "I don't know if I can stay here," she admitted. "Everything reminds me of him." "You don't have to decide tonight. Just know that whatever you choose, you have help." Preston stood, placing his hat back on his head. "I should let you rest. I'll come by tomorrow if that's all right. Maybe bring some supplies to patch that roof." Hannah nodded, grateful for his kindness but still lost in her fog of grief. "Thank you, Mr. Granger." "Preston," he corrected with a gentle smile. "Get some sleep, Hannah. Things won't seem quite so dark tomorrow." After he left, Hannah cleared the table, wrapping Thomas's untouched meal and storing it away. She couldn't bring herself to throw it out, not yet. She crawled into the bed that now seemed too big and empty, and for the first time since the news of Thomas's death, she slept without dreaming. True to his word, Preston returned the next day with tools and materials to repair her roof. Hannah watched from below as he worked, methodically replacing damaged shingles and sealing leaks. "You don't have to do this," she called up to him around midday. Preston paused his work, wiping sweat from his brow. "I know I don't have to, I want to." For the next week, Preston came by every day after his work at the ranch. He fixed the roof, repaired the loose floorboards on the porch, and chopped enough firewood to last through the coming winter. Hannah found herself looking forward to his visits, though guilt immediately followed such thoughts. Thomas had only been gone 10 days. How could she find comfort in another man's company so soon? "You're looking better," Preston observed one evening as Hannah handed him a cup of coffee on the porch. It was a warm August night, the stars unusually bright over the mountains. "I feel a little better," she admitted. "Having things to do helps, thank you for that." Preston nodded, sipping his coffee. "Have you decided what you're going to do, stay or go?" Hannah sat in the chair next to him, gazing out at the silhouettes of pines against the darkening sky. "I think I need to stay, at least for now. This was our dream, Thomas's and mine. I can't just abandon it. It won't be easy. Nothing worth doing ever is. That's what Thomas always said." Preston smiled. He was right about that. They fell into a comfortable silence, listening to the distant sounds of the town and the closer songs of crickets and night birds. "I could help you find work," Preston said eventually. "The general store might need someone, or perhaps the schoolhouse. I know you mentioned you used to teach back east." Hannah nodded. "I did for a short while. But most schools won't hire married women, and I'm not sure they'd hire a widow either. Central City isn't like back east. People here care more about whether you can do the job than about your circumstances." "Perhaps you're right. I'll inquire tomorrow." Preston finished his coffee and stood. "I should head back. Got an early start in the morning. We're moving cattle to the high pasture." Hannah stood as well. "Will I see you tomorrow? I'll be gone for a few days with the herd, but I'll stop by when I get back." Hannah felt a surprising pang of disappointment. She'd grown accustomed to Preston's daily visits, the steady routine of his presence providing an anchor in her grief. "Thank you for everything, Preston. I don't know how I would have managed without your help." Preston shifted his weight, looking somewhat uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Just keeping my promise to Thomas." As he turned to leave, Hannah called after him, "Be careful up there in the high country." He looked back, a smile touching his lips. "Always am, Hannah, always am." The days without Preston stretched longer than Hannah expected. She ventured into town, summoning courage. She didn't know she had to inquire about employment. To her surprise, Mrs. Jennings at the general store offered her a position immediately. "We need someone with neat handwriting for the books," the older woman explained. And someone who can count better than my husband. He's a fine merchant, but numbers muddle him something terrible. The work was straightforward enough, and Hannah found that staying busy dulled the sharp edges of her grief. In the evenings, she returned to her cabin and often found herself looking down the path, hoping to see Preston's familiar figure approaching. On the fourth day, while Hannah was recording inventory in the store's ledger, the bell above the door jingled. She looked up to see Preston, his skin bronzed from days in the sun, his eyes lighting up when he spotted her behind the counter. "Mrs. Jennings mentioned she'd hired you," he said, removing his hat. "Looks like you're settling in." Hannah couldn't help the smile that spread across her face. "I am. It's good to have purpose again." Mrs. Jennings emerged from the storeroom, beaming at Preston. "Well, if it isn't the finest cowboy in the territory, what brings you to my humble establishment, Mr. Granger? Just needed some coffee and tobacco, madam. And perhaps a bit of that peppermint candy if you've got it." Mrs. Jennings bustled about, gathering his items. "You planning to call on someone special with that candy?" she asked with a knowing glance between him and Hannah. Preston's cheeks colored slightly. "Just have a sweet tooth, madam." Hannah felt her own face grow warm. Mrs. Jennings was not known for her subtlety, and the whole town likely knew that Preston had been calling on the young widow. After Preston had paid for his purchases and left with a promise to stop by Hannah's cabin later, Mrs. Jennings gave her a maternal smile. "He's a good man, that Preston Granger. Honest as the day is long. He's just being kind because he was friends with my husband," Hannah said quickly. Mrs. Jennings raised an eyebrow. "Is that what you think?" "Well, I've known that boy since he first came to Central City 5 years ago, and I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you." Hannah busied herself with the ledger again. "It's too soon," she whispered. "Thomas has only been gone 2 weeks." Mrs. Jennings patted her hand gently. "Grief doesn't run on a schedule, dear, and neither does life. Out here, we learn to take happiness where we can find it." That evening, Preston arrived at Hannah's cabin with a small bundle wrapped in brown paper. "I brought you something," he said, handing it to her as they sat on the porch. Hannah unwrapped it to find a book of poetry by Emily Dickinson. "I remember you mentioned she was your favorite," Preston said, watching her face. "Found it at the booksellers in Central City." Hannah ran her fingers over the embossed cover. "You remembered that." "I only mentioned it once weeks ago when Thomas was still." Her voice caught. "I remember most things you say," Preston admitted quietly. Hannah looked up at him, really seeing him for perhaps the first time. Not as Thomas's friend or her helpful neighbor, but as a man, a kind, thoughtful man who noticed details and cared enough to remember them. "Thank you," she said, holding the book to her chest. "This means more than I can say." They talked long into the night, about books and poems, about Preston's life before Central City. He'd grown up on a farm in Pennsylvania before heading west at 18, and about Hannah's dreams of one day opening a proper school in town. As September turned to October, Hannah found herself looking forward to the end of each day when Preston would visit. They would sit on the porch if the weather was fair, or by the fire if it was not, talking about everything and nothing. She still missed Thomas. The pain of his loss hadn't disappeared, but it had changed shape somehow, becoming something she could carry rather than something that threatened to crush her. The first snow came early that year, dusting the mountains in mid-October and bringing a sharp chill to the air. Preston arrived one evening with his arms full of firewood, stomping snow from his boots before entering Hannah's cabin. "Winter's coming fast this year," he said, stacking the logs by the fireplace. "Might be a hard one." Hannah brought him a cup of hot coffee, their fingers brushing as she handed it to him. The simple contact sent an unexpected warmth through her. "I've been thinking," Preston said, settling into a chair by the fire. "The ranch is looking for someone to cook for the hands this winter. The pay is decent, and there's a small cabin that comes with it. Might be better than riding back and forth to town every day once the snow gets deep." Hannah felt a flicker of disappointment. "You're moving to the ranch," Preston nodded. "Seems sensible." But I'm worried about you here, all alone when the deep snows come. I'll be fine. The town isn't far and I've stored plenty of firewood and supplies. Preston looked troubled. Hannah, these mountains can be dangerous in winter if you got snowed in or if you fell ill. What are you suggesting? Preston set down his coffee cup and leaned forward, his expression serious. I've been thinking on this a great deal. I know it might seem too soon, and maybe it is, but I can't bear the thought of you being alone out here. Hannah's heart began to race. Preston, what are you saying? I'm saying that I care for you, Hannah, more than I should, perhaps, given the circumstances, but I do, and I'm asking if you might consider. He paused, taking a deep breath. If you might consider marrying me. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the crackling of the fire. Hannah stared at him, her mind whirling with conflicting emotions. I know it's sudden, Preston continued when she didn't respond, and I know you still grieve for Thomas. I'm not asking you to stop loving him. I would never ask that, but I'm offering you protection, companionship, and in time, perhaps something more. Hannah found her voice at last. Preston, I don't know what to say. You don't have to answer now, think on it. But know that my offer comes from true feeling, not just duty to Thomas's memory. Hannah rose from her chair and moved to the window, gazing out at the snow-covered landscape. What would people think? A widow remarrying so soon? Preston stood too, but kept his distance. People will talk no matter what you do, that's the way of small towns, but those who matter will understand. Hannah turned to face him, tears in her eyes. I do care for you, Preston. You've been my strength these past 2 months, but marriage, it's such a big step. It is, he agreed. And if you're not ready, I understand. But winter's coming and I need to make arrangements one way or another. Can I have some time to think? Preston nodded. Of course, I'll be back in 3 days. Will that be enough? Yes, thank you for understanding. After Preston left, Hannah sat by the fire for hours, wrestling with her thoughts. She did care for Preston, perhaps even loved him, though she hesitated to name the feeling so soon after losing Thomas. Would it be a betrayal of Thomas's memory to find happiness with another man? Or would he want her to seize whatever chance for joy presented itself in this harsh land? The next morning, Hannah went to visit Thomas's grave in the small cemetery on the hill overlooking Central City. The simple wooden cross marked a place she had avoided since the funeral, but now she felt drawn there, needing some kind of resolution. She knelt in the snow beside the grave, tears freezing on her cheeks in the cold air. I miss you, she whispered. Every day I miss you. But Preston has been so kind, so good to me. I think I might be falling in love with him. Would you hate me for that? The only answer was the soft sigh of wind through the bare branches of the aspens. Hannah stayed until her knees were numb from the cold, talking to Thomas as if he could hear, explaining her feelings, her fears, her hopes. As she stood to leave, a sense of peace settled over her. Thomas had loved her enough to want her happiness above all else. She knew what he would say if he could. 3 days later, when Preston returned, Hannah was waiting for him on the porch despite the cold. I've made my decision, she said as he approached. Preston stopped at the foot of the steps, his expression guarded. And I will marry you, Hannah said softly. Not just for protection or companionship, but because I care for you deeply. I believe we could build a good life together. The smile that broke across Preston's face was like the sun emerging from behind clouds. He bounded up the steps and took her hands in his. You've made me the happiest man in Colorado territory, he said, his voice husky with emotion. I promise I'll do everything in my power to make you happy, Hannah. I know you will, she squeezed his hands. But there's something I need you to understand. A part of my heart will always belong to Thomas. Can you accept that? Preston nodded solemnly. I would expect nothing less. Thomas was a good man who loved you well. I would never ask you to forget him. Hannah felt tears well in her eyes, but they were different from the tears she'd shed in recent months, lighter somehow, touched with hope rather than despair. When? Preston asked. When shall we be married, before winter sets in fully? 2 weeks' time, 2 weeks it is. I'll speak to Reverend Miller tomorrow. They were married in the small church in Central City on the first Sunday in November. The ceremony was simple, attended by a handful of friends including Mrs. Jennings, who wept openly, and several of the ranch hands who had worked with both Thomas and Preston. Hannah wore a dark blue dress rather than white, a nod to her status as a widow, but she carried a small bouquet of late-blooming wildflowers that Preston had somehow found for her. As they exchanged vows, Hannah felt Thomas's presence not as a shadow over the proceedings, but as a benevolent witness, giving his blessing. That evening, Preston brought her to the small cabin at the Silver Dollar Ranch. He had spent the previous week preparing it, filling it with small comforts to make it feel like home. A quilt on the bed, curtains at the windows, even a small bookshelf with Hannah's precious few books, including the Dickinson poetry he had given her. "It's not much," he said, watching her take it all in, "but come spring we could build something of our own if you like." Hannah turned to him, her heart full. "It's perfect, Preston." Their first night as husband and wife was tender and tentative, both of them aware of the ghosts between them but determined to forge their own path forward. Preston was gentle and patient, and Hannah found herself responding to him with a passion that surprised her. Afterward, as they lay together in the darkness, Preston stroked her hair and whispered, "I've loved you since the first day I saw you when Thomas brought you to the ranch picnic last spring. I never said anything, would never have acted on it, but I've loved you all this time." Hannah propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "Because you needed to choose me for me, not because of some declaration that might have made you feel obligated. I wanted you to be sure." Hannah kissed him softly. "I am sure." "I choose you, Preston Granger." Winter settled over the Colorado mountains with a vengeance that year. Snow piled high around the cabins at the Silver Dollar Ranch, and the temperature dropped so low that the creek froze solid. But inside their small home, Hannah and Preston found warmth and comfort in each other. Hannah took to her role as cook for the ranch hands with enthusiasm, discovering a talent for making hearty meals that satisfied the hungry men. In the evenings, she would teach basic reading and arithmetic to those who wanted to learn, fulfilling in some small way her dream of being a teacher. Preston worked from dawn till dusk, often coming home exhausted but always taking time to tell Hannah about his day and listen to hers. They developed routines and rituals, favorite meals and shared jokes, gradually building the foundation of a life together. Christmas came, bringing with it Hannah's first real test. The holiday had been Thomas's favorite, and as the day approached, she found herself sinking into melancholy, remembering the previous Christmas when Thomas had surprised her with a pair of silver combs for her hair. Preston noticed her sadness but didn't press. On Christmas Eve, after the ranch's celebration dinner, he brought her back to their cabin where a small pine tree stood in the corner, decorated with paper stars and candles. "I know today is hard for you," he said, taking her hands in his, "but I wanted to give you this." He handed her a small package wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a journal, its leather cover tooled with delicate flowers. "For your thoughts and memories," Preston explained. "All of them, the sad and the happy. Thomas will always be part of your story, Hannah, and now I hope I can be too." Hannah held the journal to her chest, overcome with emotion. "You understand me so well," she whispered. "I try to," Preston said, drawing her into his arms. "That's what love is, isn't it? Trying to understand another person's heart." As winter slowly gave way to spring, Hannah began to suspect she was with child. She waited until she was certain before sharing the news with Preston, watching his face carefully as she told him one evening in late April. The joy that transformed his features was answer enough. He whooped loudly, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around their small cabin. "A baby, our baby," he exclaimed, setting her down gently as if she might break. "Are you feeling well? Do you need anything? Should you be resting more?" Hannah laughed at his sudden concern. "I'm perfectly fine. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time, but yes, we're going to have a child sometime in November, I think." Preston knelt before her, placing his hand reverently on her still flat stomach. "Hello in there," he said softly. "I'm your pa, and I can't wait to meet you." The moment was so tender that Hannah felt tears spring to her eyes. This child would never know Thomas, would only know Preston as their father, but that seemed right somehow, a new life for their new beginning. As Hannah's pregnancy progressed, Preston became increasingly protective, insisting on hiring a young girl from town to help with the cooking at the ranch so Hannah could rest more. He built a cradle with his own hands, spending evenings carefully sanding every edge and corner until it was smooth as silk. Summer came, bringing long, golden days and short, warm nights. Hannah's belly grew round, and she felt the first flutterings of life within her. The baby was active, especially in the evenings when Preston would talk to her stomach, telling stories about his day or singing old lullabies his mother had sung to him. In August, nearly a year after Thomas's death, Hannah visited his grave again. This time, Preston accompanied her, standing a respectful distance away as she knelt by the wooden cross, now weathered by a year of mountain seasons. "I'm happy, Thomas," she said quietly. "Preston is a good man and we're going to have a baby soon. I wish you could have known him or her. I wish things had been different, but I wanted you to know that I'm all right. I'm more than all right." As she stood, Preston came to her side, offering his arm for support. Together they walked back down the hill toward town. "Thank you for coming with me," Hannah said. "It meant a lot." Preston squeezed her hand. "He was an important part of your life. He'll always be important." In early November, as the first snow of the season began to fall, Hannah went into labor. The ranch hands rode for the doctor in Central City, but babies wait for no one, and by the time he arrived, Hannah had already delivered a healthy baby boy with only Preston and Mrs. Jennings, who lived nearby, in attendance. "He's perfect," Preston whispered, cradling his son as Hannah rested. 10 fingers, 10 toes, and a good set of lungs. Hannah smiled tiredly. "What shall we name him?" Preston looked thoughtful. "What about Thomas Granger?" Hannah's eyes filled with tears. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. It's a good, strong name." Hannah reached for Preston's hand. "Thomas Preston Granger, after both of the men I've loved." Preston's eyes glistened as he bent to kiss her forehead. "That's perfect." Young Thomas grew strong and healthy with Preston's blue eyes and Hannah's dark hair. He was an easy baby, curious about everything and quick to smile. Preston doted on him, carrying him around the ranch, showing him the horses and cattle, narrating everything they saw together. As the boy's first birthday approached, Mr. Sullivan, the ranch owner, called Preston into his office. "I'm getting old, Granger," the white-haired man said without preamble. "Thinking about heading back east to live with my daughter, been considering what to do with this place." Preston nodded, wondering where the conversation was leading. "You've been my foreman for 2 years now. Done a fine job. The men respect you and you know ranching better than most." "Thank you, sir." "I'm offering you the ranch, Granger. Not for free, mind you. I've got a fair price in mind and we can work out terms for payment over time. But I'd rather sell to someone who'll take care of the place than some city slicker who'll run it into the ground." Preston was momentarily speechless. Owning his own ranch had been a dream since he'd first come west, but he'd never imagined it might happen this way. "That's quite an offer, Mr. Sullivan. I'll need to discuss it with my wife." Sullivan waved a hand. Of course. Talk it over with Hannah. She's a sensible woman. Let me know by the end of the week." That evening, Preston could barely contain his excitement as he told Hannah about Sullivan's offer. They sat at their small table, young Thomas asleep in his cradle nearby as Preston laid out the details. "It's a risk," he admitted. "The payments would stretch us thin for a while. But in the end, we'd have something that's truly ours, something to pass on to Thomas one day." Hannah listened carefully, asking thoughtful questions about the finances and practical considerations. Finally, she smiled. "I think we should do it. I believe in you, Preston, and I believe in us." Preston reached across the table to take her hand. "We've come so far in a year, haven't we? From that day I found you crying at the table with 2 plates. Hannah's eyes softened at the memory. You told me to eat, that Thomas would want me to. You were right. He would have wanted me to go on living, to find joy again. And have you found joy? Hannah looked around their small cabin, at the sleeping child, at the man across from her whose love had helped her rebuild her life from the ashes of tragedy. Yes, she said with absolute certainty. I have found joy, more than I ever thought possible. They purchased the Silver Dollar Ranch from Mr. Sullivan, signing the papers on young Thomas's first birthday. The celebration that followed was for both milestones: the boy's entry into his second year of life and the family's new beginning as ranchers in their own right. Spring brought new challenges and opportunities. Preston hired additional hands to help with the expanding herd, while Hannah took charge of the vegetable garden and chicken coop, determined to make the ranch as self-sufficient as possible. They began construction on a larger house that summer, one with room for their growing family. Hannah was expecting their second child, due in the fall. Preston insisted on building a proper schoolroom as part of the new house, knowing Hannah still dreamed of teaching. One day, when the children are older and we have more neighbors with young ones, you can be the teacher you've always wanted to be, he told her. The new house was finished just before the first snow, a sturdy 2-story structure with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Hannah decorated it simply but warmly, creating a home that welcomed all who entered. Their second child, a daughter they named Elizabeth, was born in October. She had her father's determined nature but her mother's quiet thoughtfulness. Young Thomas, now almost 2, regarded his baby sister with a mixture of curiosity and jealousy that often made his parents laugh. Life fell into the rhythm of the seasons, calving in spring, moving the herd to high pastures in summer, roundups in fall, and the quiet endurance of winter. The ranch prospered under Preston's careful management, and Hannah found fulfillment in raising their children and making their house a home. On the 5th anniversary of their marriage, Preston surprised Hannah by taking her to Central City for a night away from the ranch. They stayed at the Grand Teller House Hotel, dined at the finest restaurant in town, and attended a performance at the newly built Opera House. As they walked back to the hotel under a canopy of stars, Preston stopped and turned to Hannah. Are you happy, truly happy with the life we've built? He asked. Hannah looked up at him, at the face that had become as dear to her as her own reflection. More than happy, she said. I'm content in the deepest sense of the word. You gave me back my life when I thought it was over, Preston. You showed me that love doesn't have to end, that the heart can expand to hold more without letting go of what came before. Preston's eyes shone in the moonlight. I never thought I could love anyone the way I love you. Every day it only grows stronger. Even when I burn the biscuits. Hannah teased, lightening the moment. Especially then, Preston laughed, pulling her close, because that's when you get that little wrinkle of frustration right here. He kissed the spot between her eyebrows. They stood there under the stars, holding each other, 2 people who had found their way to love through grief and kindness, patience and understanding. The path hadn't been straight or easy, but it had led them home to each other. Years passed. The Silver Dollar Ranch became known throughout Colorado Territory for its fine cattle and generous hospitality. Hannah eventually did open a small school on the ranch, teaching not only her own children but those of neighboring ranchers and the ranch hands' families. Preston's reputation as a fair and knowledgeable rancher grew, and he was often asked to serve as judge at county fairs or to help settle disputes about grazing rights or water access. Hannah took pride in his accomplishments, just as he took pride in hers. Their family expanded with the birth of their 3rd child, a son they named William, when Thomas was 7 and Elizabeth was 5. The 3 children grew strong and capable in the mountain air, learning the ways of the ranch alongside their lessons in reading, writing, and arithmetic. On Thomas's 10th birthday, Preston took him to visit the grave of his namesake. They stood together before the wooden cross, now replaced with a proper headstone, as Preston explained the connection. Your mother loved him very much, Preston said, and he was my friend. He was a good man who would have been proud to know you carry his name. Thomas, serious beyond his years, nodded thoughtfully. Do you think he would mind that you're my father now? Preston knelt to look his son in the eye. No, I don't think he would mind at all. He loved your mother enough to want her happiness above all else, and you, Thomas Granger, are a big part of that happiness. The boy seemed satisfied with this answer. As they walked back to their horses, he slipped his small hand into Preston's larger one. I'm glad you're my pa, he said simply. Preston had to clear his throat before he could respond. And I'm glad you're my son. Hannah watched their return from the porch of their home, Elizabeth and William playing at her feet. The sight of Preston and Thomas riding together, so alike in the way they sat their horses and in the tilt of their heads as they talked, filled her heart to overflowing. That evening, after the children were in bed, Preston found Hannah standing on the porch, gazing at the stars. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, and she leaned into his strength. Thomas asked me today if his namesake would mind that I'm his father, Preston said quietly. Hannah turned in his arms to look at him. And what did you tell him? I told him that Thomas would want your happiness above all else. You were right, Hannah said. He would have, just as I know you would want mine if our situations had been reversed. Preston nodded solemnly, with all my heart. Hannah reached up to touch his face, tracing the lines that 15 years on the frontier had etched around his eyes and mouth. They were both in their 40s now, no longer the young people who had found each other in the wake of tragedy. Do you ever wonder how different our lives might have been? She asked. Preston considered this. Sometimes. But then I look at our children at this home we've built at you, and I can't imagine any other path that could have led to such joy. Hannah smiled, the same smile that had captured his heart all those years ago. Nor can I. It wasn't the life I expected, but it's the one I was meant to live. With you. They stood together on the porch of the home they had built, surrounded by the life they had created together, under a vast Colorado sky filled with stars. From grief had come healing, from loss had come finding, from 2 plates at a table and a simple act of kindness had grown a love story that would be told in their family for generations to come. Eat, he had said that day so long ago. He'd want you to. And she had eaten, taking the first small step back toward life. Neither of them could have known then where that step would lead, but looking back, the path seemed clear, a journey from darkness into light, from solitude into connection, from sorrow into joy. 2 people, finding each other when they needed it most, building something beautiful from the ashes of what had been lost. That was their story. That was their love. And it was enough, more than enough, for a lifetime of happiness under the big sky of the American West.